This lesson is about factoring, and the particular type of factoring we're going to look at in this video is for reverse FOIL, or what I call reverse FOIL. It's also sometimes referred to as X factoring, because you'll use an X or a diamond to try to factor. Keep in mind that whenever you're asked to factor, you should always factor out any greatest common factors first, and that is explained in a previous video. You use reverse FOIL or X factoring for trinomials when the leading coefficient is a 1. We will look at a different method when the leading coefficient isn't 1, but if it is a 1, you'll just draw a little x, and you'll set up two sets of binomials with your variable that you're working with at the beginning, and then you'll either fill in pluses or minuses depending upon the signs of the numbers that you're working with. You need to find the two other numbers in your sets of parentheses. And to find those two other numbers, you're going to do a little puzzle. And in the puzzle, you're going to draw this x, and the top number is going to be the c value from your polynomial. So the number that's the constant goes on the top. And the number that's the b value, or the number that's in the middle next to the plain variable, that's going to go on the bottom. And your job is to find factors of the top number that add up to the bottom number. And there's only going to be two numbers that are going to make that work at the same time. And so once you find the numbers, you fill them in, and then those are the numbers that you need for your factoring. So let's put this into practice. Here's a trinomial with a leading coefficient of 1. So I'm going to do a little x here, and I'm going to fill in the constant, the very last number on the top, and the middle number, or the b value, the number next to the plain x, on the bottom. And I want to look for factors of 3 that add up to 4. Well, luckily 3 is a prime number. It only has two factors, 1 and 3. Keep in mind that I could have said 3 and 1 and that would still be correct. So the order that the factor's in doesn't matter. So now that I've found the two numbers, I go ahead and write x plus 1 and x plus 3. So I just fill in my two factors in the missing blanks. Keep in mind again here, if you had said x plus 3 and then x plus 1, that would still be correct. So that's the X method. That is reverse FOIL. So let's try it for a few more examples. If you have a trinomial with a leading coefficient of 1, then you can draw an x, and you need factors of 12 that add up to 7. Now, one thing that I would encourage you to do if you're not very comfortable with your math facts is to either think to yourself or write down, if you need to, pairs of numbers that multiply to make the top. I usually encourage students to go in order. So go with 1 and 12. The next number you should try, if it's even, is 2. 2 does go into 12 6 times. Next, try 3. 3 goes into 12 4 times, and that's it. So those are the only pairs of numbers that are going to work. Then scan the list and look for the pair that adds up to 7. So clearly we got 3 and 4. So x plus 3 and x plus 4 are the factors that we're looking for. Let's continue and try some problems that have negatives. Notice that, again, all three of these are trinomials with leading coefficients of 1. So I'm going to use an x, factors of 8 that add up to negative 6. So I know I'm going to use 4 and 2 because those add up to positive 6, but since I want them to add up to a negative 6, I need to think about what that's going to do, or what that's going to be like for my factors. The only way those are going to multiply to make a add to make a negative 6 is if they're both negative. And that's okay, because if I want to multiply them to get the 8, negative times negative is positive. So know that sometimes you'll have to incorporate some negative numbers for your factors. So my answer then is going to be x minus 2 and x minus 4. Keep in mind that that's the same as saying x plus negative 2 and x plus negative 4. Same thing on the next one. We do have some negatives we need to worry about. So when we set up our x, the constant goes at the top, the middle number goes on the bottom. Looking for factors of 10, negative 10 that add up to 3. So I know I'm going to use 5 and 2 there. And I want them to add up to positive 3. but I know that one of them needs to be negative in order to make a negative product. If I make the 5 negative, when I add these together I'll get a -3, and that's not what I want, so the negative has to go with the 2. Keep in mind here that if you had written it as -2, 5, that is the same answer, but the negative still goes with the number 2. So my factors are going to be x minus 2 and x plus 5. Again, those could be flip-flopped. And then our last one, if we draw the x, we need factors of -15 that add up to -2. So if I think about factors of 15, the only two that really come to mind are 5 and 3. And now I want them to add up to make a negative, so the bigger number needs to be negative here. So I'm going to say x minus 5 and x plus 3. So now you can see when you're going to have one of each and when you're going to have both being negative. When the middle number is negative, then both of the factors you're coming up with will be negative. If the last number is negative, then the smaller factor will be negative. When both numbers here are negative, then the larger factor will be negative. And that's going to always be true. I don't know that you need to memorize that idea, just know that that's kind of a pattern that you can follow. I want to do one more with you. Now, we did learn another method for this called the difference of squares, but I want you to realize that there are other ways to factor this one, and in fact you can use reverse FOIL to factor this as well. So you can factor it multiple ways. If we use the X factoring or reverse FOIL method, I'd be looking for factors of -9 that add up to, wait a minute, that b value is missing. Keep in mind that we could rewrite this polynomial like this. The b value in the middle is missing because the b value is 0. 0 times x is 0, and 0 minus 9 is -9. So those two statements are equivalent to each other, but this one is going to help me factor using the X method. So if I'm looking for factors of -9 that add up to 0, of course those factors would be 3 and -3. So I'd factor this into x plus 3 and x minus 3, which would have been our same answer if we had used difference of squares to factor it as well. So I'd like students to give this a try now. Copy down these 3, give them a try all on your own, pause the video, and answers will be displayed shortly. There is one more example we're going to do after these, so please don't shut down the video too soon. And so here are your answers for your 3 practice questions. Again, keep in mind that you could have your answers flip-flopped. So for example, on the first one, if you had said x plus 2 and then x minus 6, that is still a correct answer. Also, if you have x minus 6 or x plus -6, those are equivalent to each other. I have one last example that I'd like to do with you. A lot of questions have multiple letters involved, and I don't want students to get too freaked out when there's more than just an X that's going on. Keep in mind that we could do this question without the Y's, and that's kind of what I want you to think about. The Y's are going to behave the same as the X's because they follow the same pattern. There's 2 here and there's only 1 in the middle. So if we just temporarily take away those Y's and try to factor it, without that, we can incorporate the x and the y later. So I'm looking for factors of -20 that add up to -1. So I know the numbers for 20 are going to have to be pretty close together in order for them to make a 1. So that would have to be 5 and 4. Now for those to combine to make a -1, the bigger number has to be negative. So now when I set up, normally I would have done x minus 5 and x plus 4. But because I need to incorporate a y, now it's not just x, it's xy in both of those locations. So don't get overwhelmed or freak out because there might be multiple letters. Handle it just like you normally would. It's just sometimes you're going to have extra letters that you have to deal with, but they're going to behave the same as a single letter would.